They don't come into your life with red flags. They come with warmth, with attention, with the exact version of themselves you've been waiting to meet. And that's the most terrifying part about manipulators. They don't steal your trust. They earn it. Carl Jung believed that manipulation doesn't begin in conversation. It begins in perception. The manipulator studies you, finds your cracks, learns your emotional language, and then slowly begins to speak it, until you can't tell what's real anymore. This isn't just about toxic relationships. It's about losing yourself, one small compromise at a time. You laugh a little less freely. You speak more carefully. You start questioning your own memory. You stop asking for what you need. You begin to reshape yourself, not because they told you to, but because they made you feel like that's what love looks like. And this is how it starts. Not with control, but with closeness. They mirror you. They understand you. They validate you. And before you realize what's happening, you've let them into the most unguarded parts of your psyche. And that's exactly where they operate. Carl Jung wrote that we are not just shaped by the conscious mind, but ruled by the unconscious. And that's what a manipulator exploits. Not your logic, your emotional instincts. They don't argue facts. They twist emotions. They don't say, "You're wrong." They say, "Wow, I didn't expect you to act like this." They don't scream. They sigh. They let silence linger long enough to make you feel like you did something. It's not domination. It's subtle distortion. The truth bends, just enough to make you question yourself. The warmth fades, just enough to make you chase what you used to have. The approval disappears, just enough to make you wonder what you did wrong. And in that space, you become manageable. You start trying harder. You become easier to guilt. You get addicted to the little moments of affection that now feel like rewards. Rewards for being the version of yourself that makes them comfortable. Because somewhere along the way, the dynamic shifted. You're no longer in a relationship. You're in a game you didn't agree to play. And it's not that they always act cruel. No. They keep you close by being everything you once needed. That's how they maintain control. Manipulation, Jung would argue, is not a conscious act of evil. It's a psychic defense. A manipulator lies to others because they first lied to themselves. They fear being vulnerable. They fear being powerless. So they manufacture control. Charm becomes armor. Guilt becomes glue. Power becomes intimacy. But here's the part no one wants to admit. You didn't just fall for them because they were clever. You fell because they touched a wound you hadn't healed yet. That's what makes it so hard to leave. Because they don't just manipulate you. They awaken something unspoken in you. Maybe you were always afraid of being left. Maybe you were always trying to prove you were worthy. Maybe you grew up believing love meant sacrifice. And they used that. Not always intentionally, but relentlessly. They don't tie you down. They make you hold the rope yourself. You'll find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, explaining feelings you barely understand, justifying your reactions, begging for understanding. And worst of all, you'll start hiding things from your own friends. Because deep down, you know it's not right. But you've convinced yourself that you're the problem, that you're too sensitive, too reactive, too much. That's the genius of manipulation. It doesn't silence you. It makes you silence yourself. Carl Jung warned that those who avoid their own shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of themselves, will project those qualities onto others. A manipulator often accuses you of the very things they are doing. They cheat and accuse you of being unfaithful. They lie and call you dishonest. They withdraw and say you're emotionally unavailable. This is not coincidence. This is shadow projection. And the more you defend yourself, the more power you give them. Because now you're reacting. Now you're explaining. Now you're trying to prove something. And they're watching. Emotionally detached, but deeply in control. This isn't love. This is puppetry. But you won't see the strings at first. You'll just feel tired, confused, anxious, uncertain, like your nervous system is on high alert, but you can't point to why. And maybe the worst part is, you'll start doubting your own story. You'll question your memory. You'll second-guess your intuition. You'll feel guilty for feeling bad. That's when the manipulation is complete. Not when they control your behavior, but when they control your perception. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But manipulators don't do that. They reject their own vulnerability, so they can't tolerate weakness in themselves, so they punish it in you. And in that punishment, you slowly lose your voice, your needs, your clarity, your strength. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And by the time you realize how deep it goes, you've forgotten what it feels like to be yourself. It doesn't always start with pain. Sometimes it starts with chemistry, the kind that feels cosmic, fated, like you've finally been seen. They say all the right things. They remember the smallest details. They mirror your values. They talk about the future like you're already in it. And you tell yourself, this is what I've been waiting for. Not because you're naive, but because you're human. You've longed for safety, for recognition, for someone who makes you feel chosen. That's what makes it so devastating. Later, when everything that felt like love turns into something you can't name. Take Priya, for example. She met him at a time in her life when she felt invisible. Work was draining. Her friends were distant. She'd just come out of a breakup where she was the one who gave everything. And then he appeared. He called her radiant, said he'd never met someone so emotionally aware, told her she had the kind of presence that made people feel safe. She cried the night he said that, because no one had ever seen her like that before. But slowly, barely noticeably, it changed. First, the compliments turned into comparisons. You're not like other women, but don't turn into them. You used to be so easy to talk to. What happened? You're getting a little too emotional lately. And she tried harder. She asked fewer questions, held back her feelings, started saying, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. She told herself she was overreacting, that she just had to be more secure, that maybe she was too sensitive. That's how manipulation works. Not with force, with slow erosion. The manipulator doesn't tear you down. They make you do it to yourself. Carl Jung believed that people don't just project their shadow onto others. They also attract the exact people who will trigger it. Priya wasn't foolish. She was unfinished. She hadn't yet faced the part of herself that felt unworthy, the part that believed love had to be earned, that affection had to be managed. And he played right into that wound, not by planning it, but by sensing it. He began withdrawing affection when she didn't behave the way he liked. He made small jokes in front of others that stung, then said, "Don't be so sensitive." He called her jealous when she asked about the flirty texts she saw. And worst of all, he only showed her love again when she apologized, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Jung would call this a transactional bond built on fear, not love. And what did Priya fear? Abandonment, rejection, being misunderstood, being too much. So she gave in, over and over. Not because she was weak, because she had been taught by her parents, by past relationships, by society, that her needs were secondary. And manipulators smell that kind of history, even if they don't know why. They know who will bend, who will explain themselves, who will break their own boundaries to preserve the connection. And Priya did. She stopped going to her friends' gatherings because he didn't like those kinds of people. She stopped posting certain things online because he said, "It makes you look thirsty." She stopped bringing up things that bothered her because you know how you get. Until one day, she caught herself saying sorry, just for crying. And something inside her snapped, not in rage, in clarity. She realized she didn't recognize herself. The vibrant, emotionally open woman she once was gone, replaced by someone who tiptoed through her own relationship. And that's when she finally asked, "When did I become so scared to be myself?" Jung believed that the manipulator fears authentic connection because it requires vulnerability. They want access, not intimacy. They want influence, not depth. They want control, not understanding. They build relationships not to connect, but to be mirrored, to be adored, to be stabilized by someone else's devotion. But the moment your truth threatens that control, They retreat. They withhold. They punish. And you're left spiraling, wondering how love turned into fear, how praise turned into pressure, how you became silent in your own life. It's not easy to leave, because there's always the good days, the brief tenderness, the old version of them that shows up just long enough to make you believe you imagined the rest. But you didn't. Your body remembers. Your nervous system remembers. Your anxiety is the evidence. Your doubt is the leftover smoke from the emotional fire they created and denied. You didn't make it up. And you're not broken for falling into it. You're just someone who trusted. Someone who loved deeply. Someone who gave the benefit of the doubt again, and that's not weakness. Again. That's the kind of strength that deserves protection. Carl Jung would say this: who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. The manipulator never looks inward. But you can. And when you do, when you face the pattern, the pain, the parts of yourself you abandoned, you start to reclaim your power. Because manipulation only works when you doubt yourself. But once you know your worth, their control breaks. Manipulation doesn't feel like control at first. It feels like guilt. And that's exactly the trap. The manipulator doesn't shout at you. They sigh when you speak. They go quiet when you set a boundary. They tell you, do whatever you want, but in a tone that makes you second-guess your own decision. This is not about domination. It's about emotional confusion. A subtle, strategic pressure that shifts the weight of their discomfort onto your back until you start bending, shrinking, apologizing for things you didn't even do. Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the part of ourselves we repress and refuse to acknowledge. Manipulators are deeply disconnected from their own shadow. But instead of confronting their pain, they disown it and place it on you. They don't say, I feel insecure. They say, why are you talking to them? They don't say, I'm scared of being abandoned. They say, you're just going to leave me like everyone else. And just like that, their fear becomes your responsibility. Their emotions become your job. Their reactions become your fault. And the worst part? You believe it. Why? Because manipulators target empaths. People with open hearts. People who care too much. People who grew up learning to manage other people's moods as a way to survive. Maybe you had a parent who only showed love when you were quiet, obedient, selfless. Maybe you were punished for expressing emotions. Maybe you were taught that love comes with a price, and that price is yourself. So when the manipulator starts leaning on you emotionally, you don't resist. You lean in. You try harder. You take on their pain like a job. You become their counselor, their peacekeeper, their fixer. And they reward you, just enough to keep you hooked. That's the cycle. They create the chaos, then position themselves as the one who can end it. They trigger the anxiety, then soothe it with momentary affection. They cause the storm, then offer you the umbrella, but only when you behave. This is not love. It's conditional attention. Carl Jung believed that those who fail to confront their inner wounds will act them out unconsciously, repeating the same pattern again and again, hurting others without ever understanding why. The manipulator doesn't always know they're manipulating. They often believe they're just being honest or standing up for themselves. But their honesty is a weapon. Their boundaries are barriers. Their sensitivity is selective. You hurt them once by accident. They never let it go. They hurt you 5 times and call you dramatic. They want you to be honest until your honesty challenges their ego. They want communication until it makes them uncomfortable. They want closeness until it requires vulnerability. And you adapt. You compromise. You begin walking through the relationship like it's made of glass. Not because you're weak, but because you're scared of being the villain in their story. They've made you feel like standing up for yourself is cruelty, that your boundaries are abandonment, that your needs are an attack. And every time you try to express yourself, they twist it into something uglier. You say, "I feel ignored." They say, "So now I'm a terrible partner?" You say, "I need more consistency." They say, "You're never satisfied." You say, "I feel anxious when you disappear." They say, "Stop being so controlling." This isn't a conversation. It's emotional judo. They flip your words. They twist your intentions. They make you question your own goodness. And once you start defending yourself, you've already lost the frame. Because now the conversation isn't about how they hurt you. It's about how you made them feel when you brought it up. That's the brilliance of manipulation. It redirects attention. It warps narratives. It uses your empathy against you. You stop asking, "Is this relationship healthy?" And instead ask, "How can I make them feel better?" Even when you're the one bleeding. Jung believed that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In this case, the manipulator avoids their own suffering by creating smaller ones around them, confusing others, keeping control, never allowing anyone to get close enough to see their true weakness. And what is that weakness? They're terrified. Terrified of being seen without control. Terrified of needing someone without having leverage. Terrified of being vulnerable and not being met with unconditional love. Instead of facing that fear, they dominate emotional space. They build relationships that orbit around them. They test you, push you, guilt you, question you, until you become a version of yourself that serves their survival. And the tragic part? It's not always loud. Sometimes it's soft. Sometimes it looks like, "You're the only one who understands me." Sometimes it sounds like, "I've never loved anyone like I love you." And maybe that's true, but that doesn't make it safe. Because love that demands you disappear isn't love. It's consumption. You weren't created to carry someone else's shadow. You weren't born to be the emotional container for someone who refuses to heal. You deserve clarity. You deserve peace. You deserve a relationship where your truth doesn't get rewritten every time it makes someone uncomfortable. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And now, you have the chance to break it, not by changing them, but by finally choosing you. You don't realize it at first. The change is so slow, it's almost invisible. But one day, you hear yourself laugh, and it sounds unfamiliar, like someone else is using your voice. You look in the mirror, and the eyes staring back feel distant, not broken, just edited. That's what manipulation does. It doesn't just hurt you, it reshapes you, subtly, daily, quietly, until the person you were is gone, and all that's left is someone trying to survive the rules of someone else's world. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But when you've been manipulated, you forget who that even is. You begin to think you're dramatic, that your emotions are inconvenient, that you ask for too much, that your memory can't be trusted, that your instincts are wrong." Jung believed that healing comes from integration, bringing the unconscious into the light. That means looking at your patterns without shame. That means seeing your empathy not as weakness, but as a strength that was never meant to be weaponized against you. You're not broken because you cared. You're not foolish because you stayed. You're not weak because you loved. You're human. And being human means learning through pain. But it also means choosing yourself again and again. Some people never change. They keep using others to manage their inner chaos. But you don't have to live in that orbit. You can walk away, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. You can forgive yourself for the versions of you that tolerated less. You can grieve the person you thought they were. And you can begin the process of remembering who you are, without the noise of someone else's manipulation. You don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them your healing. And you certainly don't owe them your future. That belongs to you now. Carl Jung didn't teach us to run from darkness. He taught us to face it, to integrate it, to let it make us more whole, not more afraid. So if you're coming out of a manipulative dynamic, here's what you need to know. You are not too much. You were just around someone who needed you to be less. You are not crazy. You were just made to doubt your own clarity. You are not difficult. You were just inconvenient to someone who never wanted to grow. And that truth will sting. But it will also set you free. Because now, you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You will begin to notice the micro manipulations in everyday life, the way people try to guilt you into saying yes, the way charm is sometimes used as a hook, the way some people test your boundaries just to see if you'll fold. But this time, you'll be different. Not bitter, not guarded, just aware. And in that awareness is power. You'll start rebuilding trust with yourself. You'll start honoring your emotions before explaining them. You'll say no without guilt. You'll set boundaries without apologies. And most importantly, you'll stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else happy. Because now you know, true love does not confuse you. Real connection does not punish you. Healthy relationships do not require you to become smaller. So take a deep breath. This is the part where the healing begins. Not perfectly, not instantly, but honestly. You've survived manipulation. Now it's time to step back into your mind, not as a victim, but as the author. And if you've made it this far, if this video made something click, if your heart feels like it's finally being heard, you are not alone. Comment below. They almost made me forget who I am. Let others know they're not crazy, and they're not alone. Like this video, subscribe to Psychatic. And if you believe more people need to wake up from invisible control, consider tapping the super thanks. It keeps this channel growing.